afternoon, good morning, good evening. President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa is in America today. He went there with the intention of trying to reset the relationship between South Africa and the USA. It has been rocky, to say the least, particularly since President Donald Trump took office. One of the areas where South Africa was in the crosshairs of the US was when South Africa championed the court cases that took Israel to task on the issue of what is happening in Gaza. What is happening in Gaza is tragic, and many people accept it. But admittedly, many nations have avoided speaking out for fear of America. This is most unfortunate. It is a pity that international laws are being violated and no one speaks out for fear of being singled out. I think many nations, although some will not say it, and many millions of people out there saluted South Africa for putting on the table the issue of what is happening in Gaza. It is one of the sorry stories of our generation. President Cyril Ramaphosa went to America in the hope of resetting the relationship. And he was confronted by President Trump with stories of violence, violent confrontation of South Africans, specifically white South Africans. A few weeks ago, about 49 South Africans left the country as refugees and landed in America. President Trump had issued one of his many presidential orders, an order saying that South African whites would be given special privilege if they wanted to come to the US, to immigrate to America. And men took advantage of that. And this was done on the basis that white South Africans were being prosecuted in South Africa. In the picture there is some of the articles that President Trump confronted President Cyril Ramaphosa with of white South Africans who had been attacked or beaten up and some killed. As much as every life, human life matters, anything done above, outside the law, should be condemned, and rightly so. What is important here is to remember that the attacks that President Trump was referring to was not engineered by the government. I want to draw the parallel between some of the violent white farm invasions that took place north of the Limpopo in Zimbabwe, engineered by ZANU-PF. And they targeted the white farmers and their workers, and many were killed. And the white farmers were booted off the land. That has not happened in South Africa. Yes, some of the white South Africans fear that it could happen in South Africa. The number one point is it hasn't happened in South Africa. And secondly, it has not happened with the black ANC-led government's endorsement as did in Zimbabwe. I think that point must be made. Here is a video clip of what happened actually. One of the scenes in the White House when President Trump confronted President Ramaphosa. I have to say, I was impressed with President Cyril Ramaphosa's conduct on this occasion.
Mr. President, what would it take for you to be convinced that there's no white genocide in South Africa?
Well, I can answer that for the President. It's, for him. No, seriously.
I'd rather have him answer.
Yeah, I'd rather answer that. It will be.
Our President will respond to you.
Yeah, let me,
Thank you, Mr. President.
it will take President Trump listening to the voices of South Africans, some of whom are his good friends.
But Mr. I must say that we have, wait. We have thousands of stories talking about it.
Sure.
And we have documentaries, we have news stories, and that, is Natalie here, somebody here to turn that? I could show you a couple of things, and it has to be responded to.
Yeah, sure.
We have, let me see the articles, please, if you would, and turn the lights down, and just put this on, it's right behind you. Johan.
There's nothing this parliament can do with or without you people are going to occupy land. We require no permission from you, from the president, from no one. We don't care. We can do whatever you want to do. Who are you to tell us whether we can occupy land or not? We are going to occupy land. South Africa occupy land. That's who we are. Whatever we want to do, we can withdraw by land.
I am impressed by President Cyril Ramaphosa's reaction in this instance. He did emphasize the reality on the ground. You cannot accuse a government and impose the views of an opposition leader on the whole nation. The video that was being played there was Julius Malema. And for the record, Julius Malema has publicly supported and endorsed what Robert Mugabe was doing in Zimbabwe regarding the White Farm invasions. It would be unfair to say those were the views and the policies of ANC just because Julius Malema expressed those views. Julius Malema is no longer in the ANC. He is leading his own political party. And therefore, then to accuse the ANC government and confronting the ANC government with the views of Julius Malema and pretending that those were the views of ANC is, to say the least, irresponsible. Many people, when they heard that President Cyril Ramaphosa was going to America to try to reset the relationship between the two countries, it expressed the fear that he was going to be humiliated and forced to react the same way that President Zelensky of Ukraine did a few weeks ago. I'm pleased and relieved that Cyril Ramaphosa did manage to express his views and was even sometimes able to smile even when he was being confronted with these accusations. Because let's be honest, some of those accusations were absolutely baseless. As much as America has got the right to welcome anyone they like and to throw the door open to South African whites to immigrate to America, that is President Trump and his administration's prerogative. But I think it should not be done under the pretext that white South Africans are being prosecuted. There is a problem, a race problem, yes. And there is serious crime in South Africa. But the victims of the criminal activity are not just white South Africans. Black South Africans are suffering too. And yes, if we're going to criticize the South African government, we can go ahead. But we should not single it out as if to say the criminal activity and the people who are suffering are only the whites. Some of the economic complaints that have been raised are historic. South Africa cannot pretend that just because the country is now independent, they've somehow solved all their race inequality, injustices overnight. That is not true. The white population in South Africa is less than 10%. And yet, the whites own more than 70% of the commercial land. And in terms of economic wealth distribution, the whites are by far economically better off than the blacks. Those are historic problems. And leaders like Julius Malema have got every right to bring them up to the attention of the South African government in the world and to hold the ANC government to account for failing to address those inequalities. They've got every right to do so. But what must be emphasized here is that the ANC government, for all their other problems, there've been corruption and mismanagement in South Africa. And I think no one, not even any of the ANC leaders, would deny it. After all, the Gupta corruption happened during their watch. They cannot deny that. What is to be emphasized here is that South Africa, ANC, the ANC government, has not taken the route that the ZANU-PF government took. To try to cover up, ZANU-PF to try to cover up for the country's economic mismanagement and corruption turned to the whites. The land seizure in Zimbabwe, as much as ZANU-PF would want the rest of the world to believe that it was to redistribute land to the landless peasants, the truth of the matter is that is not true. A few of the landless peasants did get the land, yes, but the majority of the land in Zimbabwe is in the hands of the ruling elite. Here is President Mnangagwa in one of his farms, as you can see, stretching to the horizon. And many of ZANU-PF ruling elite have multiple farms. The late dictator Mugabe, his daughter Bona has got so many farms. The true extent of it only came out because she was going through a divorce with her husband. And she has got so many farms that if all the farms, the land were put together, they'll be the size of Lesotho. And yet, millions of the rural peasants still live in the tribal trust lands, where they do not even have title deeds to even the yard on which the homestead is built. The ZANU-PF regime is stubbornly, and I mean stubbornly, refuse to grant title deeds to the rural areas. For the same reason, the white regime of Ian Smith refused to give title deeds to the rural peasants. Why? Because Ian Smith did not want to give the rural peasants a foothold on the economic ladder, for fear that the next thing they will be asking for would be political rights, the right to vote. ZANU-PF has refused to give title deeds to the rural people for the same reasons. So ZANU-PF has refused to assist the farms, only to give them to the ruling elite, and would not even give title deeds to the few square meters of land in the rural areas to the rural povo. The regime has held them to ransom deliberately for its own political ends. This is no secret. Here is Margaret Dongo, a former Liberation War hero. She was a ZANU-PF MP. Then, when she left that party, she formed her own party, and she is commenting on the issue of why ZANU-PF still consider the rural areas its stronghold.
They have wrong priorities, especially the current government. How can you go and build an airport which services a few people, and the majority are the elite and the so-called investors? Look at the rural. I made you come to interview me because I wanted you to have the experience of the roads that we are using. If we go today to our hospital there, You feel pity with that's a hospital in a rural area. If we go to our clinic, you feel pity. We have no piped water here. Do you know the reason why the rural people vote for ZANU-PF? One, they're intimidated. Two, the policy is that the rural people should remain poor and subservient to the government. They should remain poor because if they remain poor, they continue singing the song for their master. This is why these people have been impoverished. It's for a reason. Because at the moment, if you economic empower these people, they'll go out of hand. ZANU-PF will never have control over them.
This discussion would be incomplete if I was to leave out the fact that ANC has been ZANU-PF's partner. ANC has supported ZANU-PF. In 2022, the ANC had their Congress. They knew Zimbabwe was going to hold elections the following year, 2023. They also knew that ZANU-PF has failed to hold free, fair, and credible elections. They knew that ZANU-PF was going to rig 2023 elections. And so the issue of ZANU-PF rigging the elections was the number one issue in Zimbabwe. And yet, the ANC government decided to ignore that and came up with a resolution. This is in 2022. That ANC would not accept a regime change in Zimbabwe. A clear coded message to ZANU-PF that they could rig the elections and get away with it. ANC's argument at the time was that ZANU-PF was under sanctions from the West, including the United States. And it was those sanctions that was trying to force regime change in Zimbabwe. Of course, it was irrational. If ZANU-PF has been rigging elections, it means ZANU-PF was in power without the democratic will, against the democratic will of the people of Zimbabwe. The argument was, if ZANU-PF rigged the elections, SADC should deny ZANU-PF political legitimacy. As it happened, SADC election observers, African Union election observers, both condemned Zimbabwe's 2023 election process as flawed and illegal. And when Mnangagwa insisted in ignoring SADC and AU's condemnation Many of the SADC leaders did not attend Mnangagwa's inauguration. Guess who attended it? President Cyril Ramaphosa and a high-powered South African delegation, endorsing ANC's 2023 resolution that they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. They knew ZANU-PF had rigged the elections, but they will not allow regime change in Zimbabwe. So on that score, South Africa and President Cyril Ramaphosa have a lot to answer to the people of Zimbabwe. They have not been consistent. As much as Zimbabweans applauded what South Africa was doing in terms of upholding the law, and speaking against the repeated violation of international law in the execution of the war in Gaza. Many Zimbabweans were appalled that ANC was taking a principled stand in the case of what was happening in Gaza, and yet the same regime was ignoring the blatant human rights violation in its own backyard, and indeed publicly propping up this ZANU-PF dictatorship. That is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. That is the tragedy of South Africa. And one can only hope that out of the historic events in South Africa, Gaza, in Zimbabwe, in America, people can have a real reset. So that we can finally start talking of the real issues affecting the real people in the various areas, and not come up with a fictitious agenda for whatever personal political gain. President Ramaphosa went to South Africa, to America, with the intention of resetting the South Africa-America relationship. I hope that you will return to South Africa and be able to say he was able to accomplish that task. As far as I'm concerned as an individual, I think his performance was commendable. The many people who had feared that President Trump would do a Zelensky on him, I'm pleased to say That did not happen. I think we need to reset international relationships and treat even the weakest of the weak with the dignity and humanity they deserve. Thank you very much. Have a good night.